Chapter 1. The Midnight Invitation. The winter of 1935 had draped London in a shroud of frost, and the little flat at Whitehaven Mansions was a haven of warmth. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with a penchant for order and symmetry, sat by the fire, his meticulously waxed moustache gleaming in the lamplight. His valet, George, had just delivered a silver tray bearing a single letter, its envelope edged in black. "From whom, George?" Poirot asked, his green eyes narrowing as he took the envelope with gloved fingers, noting its weight and the elegant script of his name. "A messenger boy, sir," George replied, his tone as crisp as the December air. "He said it was urgent, and left no return address." Mon Dieu, Poirot thought. An anonymous summons. How very theatrical. He slit the envelope with a letter opener, revealing a single sheet of heavy cream paper. The words, written in jet-black ink, were both precise and tantalizingly vague. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence is requested at Blackthornne Manor, near the village of Wychwood, for a New Year's Eve gathering on the 31st of December. A matter of great delicacy awaits your unparalleled intellect. The stroke of midnight will reveal all. A car will collect you at noon on the 30th. Discretion is paramount. Yours in anticipation, a friend." Poirot's lips twitched beneath his moustache. "A friend who does not sign their name," he murmured, "is no friend at all. Yet this mention of midnight, it intrigues the little grey cells." He turned the letter over, examining it for any clue, a watermark, a scent, a smudge, but found nothing save the faint perfume of lavender, a detail that piqued his curiosity further. "George," he said, "prepare my traveling case. I shall accept this mysterious invitation. The symmetry of a New Year's Eve mystery appeals to me." The following day, a sleek black Daimler arrived precisely at noon, its driver a taciturn man in a grey overcoat who spoke only to confirm Poirot's identity. The journey to Wychwood was a silent one, the countryside rolling past in a blur of frost-kissed hedgerows and skeletal trees. Blackthornne Manor loomed into view as dusk fell, its Gothic silhouette stark against the pewter sky. The manor's towers and ivy-clad walls spoke of ancient wealth, but its windows glowed with an uneasy light, as if the house itself held secrets. As the car crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat and stepped out, his cane tapping lightly on the ground. The front door swung open, revealing a butler with a face as impassive as carved marble. "Monsieur Poirot," the butler intoned. "You are expected. Please follow me." The entrance hall was grand yet oppressive, its oak panels adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. A grandfather clock stood sentinel at the far end, its pendulum swinging with a slow, deliberate tick-tock that seemed to echo in Poirot's bones. "The others have gathered in the drawing-room," the butler said, leading Poirot through a maze of corridors. "Others?" Poirot inquired, one eyebrow arching. "And who might these others be?" "You shall meet them presently," the butler replied, his tone offering no further enlightenment. As they approached the drawing-room, the murmur of voices reached Poirot's ears, some cultured, some strained, all tinged with an undercurrent of unease. He paused at the threshold, his sharp eyes scanning the room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows over a dozen or so guests. A glamorous woman in a crimson gown, a dour gentleman clutching a brandy glass, a nervous young man fidgeting with his tie, and others whose faces promised stories yet untold. The tall, silver-haired man in a tailored suit stepped forward, his smile both welcoming and guarded. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume. I am Sir Reginald Blackthornne, your host. We are delighted you could join us." Poirot inclined his head, his gaze never wavering. "Sir Reginald, the pleasure is mine. But tell me, mon ami, why does a New Year's Eve celebration require the presence of Hercule Poirot?" Sir Reginald Sepp's smile faltered, and a hush fell over the room. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 6, its chimes resonating like a warning. "All will be revealed," Sir Reginald said softly, "when the clock strikes midnight." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The game, it begins," he thought, and his little grey cells stirred with anticipation. Chapter 2. The guests assemble. The drawing-room of Blackthornne Manor was a study in contrasts, opulent yet shadowed, warm yet chilled by an unspoken tension. Hercule Poirot stood near the doorway, his small, neat figure almost lost amidst the grandeur of the high ceilings and velvet drapes. His sharp eyes, however, missed nothing. The guests, gathered in clusters like actors awaiting their cue, exuded a curious mix of curiosity and unease. The firelight flickered over their faces, revealing glimpses of secrets Poirot was determined to unravel. Sir Reginald Blackthorne, the silver-haired host, clapped his hands, drawing attention. "My friends," he said, his voice smooth but strained, "let us make introductions. We are here to celebrate the new year, and I trust you will find the company stimulating." Poirot noted the hesitation in Sir Reginald Sepp's tone, as if the man were reciting lines he did not fully believe. The detective stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Hercule Poirot, at your service. It is my pleasure to join this most intriguing gathering." A woman in a crimson gown, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, was the first to respond. She extended a gloved hand, her smile dazzling yet calculated. "Mademoiselle Vivienne Duval," she said, her French accent soft but distinct. "I'm an actress, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps you've seen my performance in The Velvet Mask at the Savoy." Poirot inclined his head. "Hélas, mademoiselle, the theatre has not had the pleasure of my company lately, but your name, it is known to me." He noted the way her eyes darted towards Sir Reginald, a fleeting glance that spoke of more than casual acquaintance. Next, a stocky man with a weathered face and a tweed suit stepped forward, his handshake firm, but his eyes guarded. "Major Harold Grayson," he said gruffly, "retired Indian Army. Not much for parties, but Sir Reginald insisted." His fingers twitched, as if longing for the weight of a rifle, and Poirot marked the faint tremor in his hand. A young man, barely out of his 20s, hovered near the fireplace, his tie askew and his sandy hair disheveled. Timothy Wren," he stammered, pushing his spectacles up his nose. I'm Sir Reginald's secretary. Sort of. I handle his correspondence." His nervous laugh grated, and Poirot observed the way Timothy's eyes flitted to a woman in the corner who stood alone, her face half hidden by a lace shawl. The woman in the shawl stepped forward reluctantly, her voice low and cultured. "Mrs. Eleanor Langston," she said, her grey eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before dropping to the floor. "My husband passed recently. Sir Reginald was kind enough to invite me." The room seemed to still at her words, and Poirot noted the tightening of Major Grayson's jaw. Others followed: Dr. Felix Mortimer, a physician with a sharp gaze and a penchant for adjusting his cufflinks; Miss Clara Henshaw, a spinster with a pinched face and a notebook clutched tightly; and Mr. Leonard Price, a solicitor whose oily smile and quick glances suggested a man accustomed to secrets. There were others, too. A quiet couple named the Dunstans, a jovial businessman called Mr. Carver, and a young artist, Miss Beatrice Lyle, whose bohemian attire clashed with the Manor's formality. As introductions concluded, Poirot's mind catalogued each guest, their gestures, their hesitations, the unspoken currents between them. A most curious assembly, he thought. Each one plays a role, but who is the puppeteer? Sir Reginald gestured toward a table laden with crystal decanters and canapes. "Please, help yourselves. Dinner will be served at 8, and then, well, we shall see what the night brings." His smile was tight, and Poirot caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. As the guests mingled, Poirot moved among them, his ears attuned to every snippet of conversation. Miss Duval laughed too brightly at Mr. Price's jest, while Major Grayson muttered about damned fool gatherings to Dr. Mortimer. Timothy Wren spilled his drink when Mrs. Langston passed by, and Miss Henshaw scribbled furiously in her notebook, her eyes darting towards Sir Reginald. Poirot paused by the grand fireplace where a portrait of a stern woman in Victorian dress glared down. "A formidable lady," he remarked to Sir Reginald, who had joined him. "My grandmother, Lady Augusta Blackthorne," Sir Reginald replied. "She built this manor and its clock, you know, obsessed with time." "She was," said it governed all things. "Très mal," Poirot murmured, his gaze drifting to the grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum swinging with relentless precision. Time. It is a most unforgiving master. A sudden clatter broke the moment. A glass shattered on the floor, dropped by Timothy Wren, whose face was pale. "Sorry, sorry," he mumbled, as the butler swooped in to clean the mess. The guests turned, their faces a gallery of reactions: amusement, irritation, and in Mrs. Langton's case, something akin to fear. Poirot's little grey cells hummed. Something is coming, he thought, and it begins with the ticking of that clock. Chapter 3. The clock strikes 11. The dining room of Blackthornne Manor, littered with the opulence of a bygone era. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across the long mahogany table, where silverware gleamed and wine-glasses sparkled. Yet beneath the veneer of festivity, a palpable tension hung over the New Year's Eve dinner, as if the guests sensed an approaching storm. Hercule Poirot, seated between Miss Vivienne Duval and Dr. Felix Mortimer, observed the scene with the precision of a watchmaker, his little grey cells attuned to every nuance. The meal was exquisite: roast pheasant, truffled potatoes, and a velouté sauce that Poirot privately approved. But the conversation was strained. Sir Reginald Blackthorne, at the head of the table, raised his glass. To new beginnings he toasted, his voice carrying a forced jollity. The guests echoed the sentiment, though their clinking glasses sounded like the tolling of bells. "New beginnings, indeed," murmured Miss Duval, her crimson lips curving into a smile that did not reach her eyes. She leaned toward Poirot, her perfume a heady mix of jasmine and ambition. "Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, do you believe in fresh starts, or do the sins of the past always follow us?" "So?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mademoiselle, the past, it is like a shadow. One may try to outrun it, but it clings always to the heels." He noted the way her fingers tightened around her glass, a fleeting sign of discomfort. Across the table, Major Grayson snorted, his weathered face flushed from wine. "Shadows, Pug. It's the future. That's the trouble. All this talk of New Year's, nothing but a chance for more mistakes." His gaze flicked toward Mrs. Eleanor Langston, who sat pale and silent, her fork untouched. Mrs. Langston's eyes met Poirot's briefly, and he saw in them a flicker of something, grief, perhaps, or fear. "My husband always loved New Year's," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "He said it was a time for truth." The words hung in the air, and Timothy Wren, seated beside her, dropped his fork with a clatter, his face reddening. "Careful, lad," said Mr. Leonard Price, the solicitor, with a chuckle that grated like sandpaper. "You'll have us thinking you're hiding something." His oily smile swept the table, lingering on Miss Clara Henshaw, who scribbled in her notebook with a fervor that suggested she was documenting more than the menu. Poirot's attention shifted to the grandfather clock in the hall, visible through the open dining-room doors. Its face, adorned with Roman numerals, glowed faintly in the candlelight, and its pendulum swung with a relentless tick-tock. As the conversation ebbed and flowed, the clock struck 10, its chimes deep and resonant, vibrating through the room like a heartbeat. 10 o'clock, remarked Dr. Mortimer, adjusting his cufflinks with a nervous tick. 2 hours until the new year. I wonder what it will bring. His sharp gaze darted toward Sir Reginald, who was engrossed in a whispered exchange with Miss Beatrice Lyle, the young artist whose bohemian scarf clashed with the table's elegance. Poirot sipped his wine, his mind cataloguing the interactions. There is a rhythm to this gathering, he thought, like a dance where each step conceals a misstep. He noted Timothy Wren's fidgeting, Miss Henshaw's furtive glances, and the way Mr. Carver, the jovial businessman, laughed too loudly at his own jokes, as if to drown out some inner disquiet. As dessert was served, a delicate lemon soufflé, the clock struck 11. The chimes were louder this time, almost mournful, and a hush fell over the table. Miss Duval shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. "That clock," she said, her voice low. "It seps as if it seps counting down to something." "Nonsense," said Sir Reginald, though his smile was strained. "It says merely an old family heirloom. My grandmother, Lady Augusta, had it crafted to mark the hours with precision. She believed time was the key to everything. "Time," Poirot murmured. "It reveals all, does it not?" His eyes scanned the guests, noting the way Mrs. Langton's hand trembled as she reached for her glass, and how Major Grayson's fingers clenched into a fist. The meal concluded, and Sir Reginald invited the guests to the drawing-room for coffee and liqueurs. As they rose, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the clock. Its hands were creeping toward midnight, and with each tick the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Something is coming, Poirot thought, his little grey cells humming, and it will not wait for the new year to strike. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and the candles flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Miss Henshaw gasped, her notebook slipping to the floor. Poirot stooped to retrieve it, glimpsing a page filled with names and cryptic symbols before she snatched it back, her face pale. "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said smoothly, but his mind was racing. "The pieces, they begin to align," he thought. But what is the picture they form? As the guests moved to the drawing-room, the clock's ticking followed them, a relentless reminder that time was running out. Chapter 4. The First Death. The drawing-room of Blackthornne Manor was alive with the clink of coffee cups and the murmur of conversation, but the undercurrent of unease had grown sharper, like a blade hidden in silk. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small frame dwarfed by the towering portrait of Lady Augusta Blackthorne, and the painted eyes seemed to follow the guests. The grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum swinging with relentless precision, was nearing midnight, and the air thrummed with anticipation. Sir Reginald Blackthorne, ever the gracious host, circulated among the guests, offering brandy and anecdotes. Yet Poirot noted the strain in his smile, the way his hand lingered too long on Miss Vivienne Duval's arm, and the fleeting glance he cast toward the clock. The other guests were no less restless. Major Grayson glowered into his drink, Mrs. Eleanor Langston clutched her shawl as if it were a lifeline, and Timothy Wren, the nervous secretary, paced near the windows, his spectacles glinting in the firelight. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured to himself. "This is no ordinary gathering. Each one plays a part, but the script, it is hidden." He sipped his coffee, his eyes darting to Miss Clara Henshaw, who sat in a corner, her notebook open, her pen scratching furiously. What was she recording? And why did Mr. Leonard Price, the solicitor, watch her with such intensity? The clock struck the first chime of midnight, its deep, resonant tone cutting through the room like a gunshot. The guests froze, their conversations halting mid-sentence. A second chime followed, then a third, each one heavier than the last. Poirot's little grey cells stirred, sensing the moment was pivotal. At the 11th chime, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It came from the direction of the library, adjacent to the drawing-room. The guests turned as one, their faces a tableau of shock and fear. Sir Reginald dropped his brandy glass, the crystal splintering on the floor. "What the devil?" he began, but Poirot was already moving, his cane tapping briskly as he strode toward the sound. The library door was ajar, and a faint light spilled into the corridor. Poirot pushed it open, revealing a scene that would haunt the guests of Blackthornne Manor for years to come. Leonard Price, the solicitor with the oily smile, lay sprawled across an oak desk, his eyes wide and unseeing, a letter-opener protruding from his chest. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the blotter a deep crimson. Miss Duval, who had followed Poirot, gasped and clutched his arm. "Mon Dieu! He's dead!" she cried, her theatrical flair undiminished even in horror. "Calmez-vous, mademoiselle," Poirot said sharply, his gaze sweeping the room. The library was a fortress of bookshelves, its single window locked tight, its curtains undisturbed. A single candle burned on the desk, its flame flickering as if in protest. The clock's final chime, the 12th, echoed through the manor, marking the arrival of the new year and the departure of a life. Sir Reginald pushed past the gathering crowd, his face ashen. "Price? Good God, what sips happened?" He turned to Poirot, his voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, you must help us. This is murder." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Oui, monsieur, it is murder most deliberate, And Hercule Poirot, he does not permit such an affront to justice. He stepped closer to the body, his eyes cataloguing every detail, the angle of the letter opener, the position of Price's hands, the faint smudge of ink on his cuff. "No one is to touch anything," he commanded. "This room, it is now under my protection." Dr. Felix Mortimer, the physician, knelt beside the body, his fingers probing for a pulse. "He said's gone," he said, his voice steady but his cufflinks splinting with a nervous tic. "Stabbed through the heart. Death was likely instantaneous." Poirot nodded, his mind racing, and yet the door was open, the window locked. "How did the killer enter and leave? Or—" He paused, his green eyes gleaming. "Perhaps the killer is still among us." A murmur of fear rippled through the guests. Timothy Wren's face was pale as chalk, and Mrs. Langston swayed, clutching Major Grayson's arm for support. Miss Henshaw, her notebook forgotten, stared at the body with a mixture of horror and fascination. Poirot turned to Sir Reginald. "Monsieur, who was the last to see Mr. Price alive?" Sir Reginald hesitated, his eyes darting to the guests. I believe he excused himself after dinner, said he needed to fetch something from the library. That was perhaps 20 minutes ago." "Vraiment," Poirot said softly, "and in those 20 minutes a man has met his end." He glanced at the clock, its hands now resting at midnight. "The 12th stroke has brought death. But why this man, and why now?" As the guests whispered among themselves, Poirot's gaze lingered on the letter opener, its handle engraved with the Blackthornne crest. A weapon of opportunity, he thought, or a symbol of something deeper. The mystery had begun, and the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot were fully engaged. Chapter 5. The Locked Room. The library of Blackthornne Manor was now a stage for tragedy, its air heavy with the scent of blood and wax. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his neat figure a beacon of calm amidst a chaos of whispered fears and sidelong glances. The body of Mr. Leonard Price remained on the desk, the letter-opener glinting cruelly in the candlelight. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked on, its relentless rhythm a reminder that time was both ally and adversary in Poirot's quest for truth. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "we are in the presence of a crime most foul. Mr. Price has been murdered, and the solution it lies within this room and among us. I ask that you remain calm and answer my questions with precision." Sir Reginald Blackthornne, his face pale but composed, nodded. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever you need. But how could this happen? The library door was open, yet the window is locked, and there zips no other way in or out." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Précisément, Sir Reginald. A locked room. It is the puzzle most delightful to the little grey cells. But first we establish the facts." He turned to the butler who stood rigid by the door. "You, monsieur? Your name?" "Carson, sir," the butler replied, his voice steady despite the strain in his eyes. "I served the Blackthornne family for 20 years." "Bon. Did you see Mr. Price enter the library, Carson?" "Yes, sir. After dinner he said he needed to retrieve some papers. I saw him cross the hall about 20 minutes before the scream." Poirot nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. The library was a fortress of oak and leather, its walls lined with books, its single window secured with an iron latch. The candle on the desk cast long shadows, and Poirot noted a faint smudge of ash near the letter opener. "And the window," he said, approaching it. "It has not been opened this night." Carson shook his head. "No, sir. I checked it myself this afternoon. It's been locked since the storm last week." Poirot tested the latch, finding it firm. "Interessant," he murmured. He turned to the guests who hovered near the doorway, their faces a gallery of unease. "Who among you spoke with Mr. Price after dinner?" Miss Vivienne Duval stepped forward, her crimson gown a stark contrast to her pallor. "I did, Monsieur Poirot. He asked me about a contract I signed last year. Something about a theatre deal. He was a solicitor, you know, always prying." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held a flicker of defiance. "Oui. "And what was his demeanor?" Poirot asked, noting the way her fingers twisted her shawl. "Nervous," she admitted. He kept glancing at his watch as if he were expecting something. Poirot's gaze shifted to Timothy Wren, whose hands shook as he adjusted his spectacles. "And you, Monsieur Wren? You were seen near the library before the scream?" Timothy's face flushed. I was just passing by. I needed air, that's all." "I didn't go in." His voice cracked, and Mrs. Eleanor Langston, standing nearby, flinched at his outburst. "Qu'avez-vous?" Poirot said gently. "The truth. It reveals itself in time." He turned to Dr. Felix Mortimer, who was examining the body with clinical detachment. "Doctor, you confirmed the cause of death. Is there anything else you observe?" Mortimer straightened, his cufflinks glinting. "The wound is precise, straight to the heart. The letter opener was driven with force, suggesting strength or anger. But there's something odd." He pointed to Price's hand. "His fingers are stained with ink, yet there's no pen nearby." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Vraiment, a curious detail." He knelt beside the desk, inspecting the ink stain and the smudge of ash. A single sheet of paper lay crumpled beneath Price's arm, its edge torn. Poirot lifted it carefully, revealing a fragment of text. "The 12th stroke will end it." A gasp rippled through the guests. Miss Clara Henshaw, clutching her notebook, whispered, "The clock. It says always the clock." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mademoiselle Henshaw, you seem most interested in this clock. Why?" She hesitated, her pinched face tightening. It sets just something Lady Augusta used to say, that the clock marked the truth of this house." Poirot filed the comment away, his mind racing. The 12th stroke, he thought. A clue, or a taunt. He addressed the group. "No one is to leave this manor until I have spoken with each of you. The killer, they are clever, but Hercule Poirot, he is more so." Major Grayson muttered, "This is madness. We're trapped here with a murderer." His words sparked a chorus of nervous agreement, and Mrs. Langston's eyes filled with tears. Poirot raised a hand. Non, we are not trapped. We are in a puzzle, and every puzzle has a solution. Return to the drawing room, and I shall begin my inquiries." As the guests filed out, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the letter opener's Blackthornne crest. A weapon of the house, he thought, or a message from its past. The clock in the hall ticked on, its rhythm a challenge to Poirot's resolve. The mystery deepened, and the little grey cells were only just beginning their work. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The drawing-room of Blackthornne Manor had lost its earlier warmth, the fire now casting long, flickering shadows that danced like spectres across the walls. Hercule Poirot stood near the hearth, his small, meticulous figure a stark contrast to the growing unease among the guests. The murder of Mr. Leonard Price had transformed the New Year's Eve gathering into a tableau of suspicion, and Poirot's green eyes glittered with purpose as he prepared to unravel the threads of the past that bound this motley assembly. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm yet commanding, "the death of Mr. Price is no random act. It is a crime rooted in motive, and motive, it is born of history. I ask you now to share what you know of this man. Speak freely, for the truth it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." The Natchian. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the relentless tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Sir Reginald Blackthornne, his silver hair dishevelled, cleared his throat. "Price was my solicitor," he said, his tone guarded. "He handled the family's legal affairs, estates, contracts, that sort of thing. A capable man, if a bit overzealous." "Overzealous, you say?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "In what manner, monsieur?" Sir Reginald hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Miss Vivienne Duval, who sat rigidly on a velvet settee. He was inquisitive, always digging into old matters, asking questions about the estate, the family history. Miss Duval's crimson lips parted in a sharp intake of breath. "He was a vulture," she said, her French accent laced with venom. "Last year he tried to ruin me. He claimed my contract with the Savoy Theatre was fraudulent, said I'd misrepresented my earnings. It was nonsense, but it cost me a role." Her hands clenched, and Poirot noted the fire in her eyes. "Anger, yes, but also fear." "Interessant," Poirot murmured. He turned to Mrs. Eleanor Langston, whose pale face seemed to blend into her lace shawl. "And you, madame, did Mr. Price cross your path in such a way?" Mrs. Langston's grey eyes widened, and her voice trembled. He represented my late husband's creditors. When Charles died, there were debts, and Price was relentless. He hounded me, threatened to seize our home. I despised him for it." Her words faltered, and she pressed a handkerchief to her lips, her hands shaking. Major Harold Grayson, standing by the window, snorted derisively. "Price was a parasite. He meddled in my affairs 2 years ago in India, tried to blackmail me over a military contract, said he had proof I'd mishandled funds. Utter rot, but he made my life hell for months." His withered face darkened, and his fist clenched as if imagining a blow. Poirot's gaze shifted to Timothy Wren, who fidgeted near the door, his spectacles fogging with nervous sweat. "Monsieur Wren, you seem most uncomfortable. Did Mr. Price also trouble you?" Timothy's Adam's apple bobbed. I barely knew him. He was always asking Sir Reginald about old documents, family papers. I just handled the correspondence. He made me nervous, that's all." His voice cracked, and Poirot noted the way his eyes darted to Mrs. Langston, a fleeting glance that spoke of more than professional acquaintance. Miss Clara Henshaw, clutching her notebook, spoke up, her voice sharp. "Mr. Price was a collector of secrets. I saw him last month poking through the village archives. He was researching the Blackthornne family, muttering about debts owed and sins unpaid. It was unsettling." Her eyes narrowed, as if she resented sharing even this much. Poirot's mind catalogued each revelation. A solicitor with a talent for enmity, he thought. But which grudge was fatal? He addressed Dr. Felix Mortimer, who leaned against a bookcase, his cufflinks glinting with restless energy. "Doctor, you have been silent. Did you know Mr. Price beyond this gathering?" Mortimer's sharp gaze met Poirot's, only professionally. "He consulted me once about a legal dispute involving a patient's will. He struck me as cunning, the sort who'd twist the truth to suit his ends." His tone was cool, but Poirot detected a flicker of unease in his posture. The detective paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. Vraiment, Mr. Price was a man who stirred the waters of discontent. But let us consider, why was he killed in the library with a weapon bearing the Blackthorne crest? At this note, he produced the crumpled paper from his pocket, reading aloud. "The 12th stroke will end it." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Miss Beatrice Lyle, the Bohemian artist, spoke for the first time, her voice low and intense. "It's the clock. Lady Augusta's clock. She used to say it kept the family's secrets, that its chimes marked moments of fate." Her eyes, framed by her wild curls, fixed on Sir Reginald, who paled. "Superstition," Sir Reginald snapped. But his voice lacked conviction. "My grandmother was eccentric, nothing more." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Non, Sir Reginald. In every superstition there is a grain of truth. This clock, it is central to our mystery. N'est-ce pas?" He turned to the group. "Tomorrow I shall examine this library again, and I shall speak with each of you alone. For now retire to your rooms. But know this, the eyes of Hercule Poirot, they see all." As the guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy with dread, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the portrait of Lady Augusta. Her stern face seemed to challenge him, and the clock's ticking echoed like a heartbeat. The past, Poirot thought. It is the key, but whose past, and what price was paid? Chapter 7. The Second Stroke. The morning after Mr. Leonard Price's murder dawned grey and cold, with a mist clinging to Blackthornne Manor like a shroud. The guests confined to the drawing-room under Hercule Poirot's watchful eye were a study in frayed nerves. The grandeur of the manor felt oppressive now. its walls closing in as the grandfather clock in the hall ticked with unyielding menace. Poirot, impeccably dressed, despite the grim circumstances, sipped a tisane, his green eyes scanning the room for the subtle tells of guilt or fear. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the strained silence. "We are in a house of secrets, and the death of Mr. Price. It is but the first note in a symphony of crime. I urge you to be vigilant for the killer. They are among us." Miss Vivienne Duval, her crimson gown replaced by a sombre black dress, clutched a cigarette holder, her hands trembling. "This is intolerable," she snapped. "How are we to sit here waiting for the next blow?" Her eyes darted to Major Harold Grayson, who stood by the window, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "Vigilance won't help," Major Grayson growled. "We're lambs to the slaughter in this cursed place." His words sent a shiver through Mrs. Eleanor Langston, who sat huddled in an armchair, her lace shawl drawn tight. Timothy Wren, his spectacles fogged with nervous sweat, stammered, Monsieur Poirot, can't you find the killer before something else happens?" His voice cracked, and Poirot noted the way his gaze lingered on Mrs. Langston, a flicker of something deeper than concern. "Patience, Monsieur Wren," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. "The little grey cells, they work tirelessly, but I require your cooperation. Tell me, who was abroad in the house last night, after we retired?" A murmur of denials followed, each guest claiming to have stayed in their room. Miss Clara Henshaw, her notebook clutched like a talisman, hesitated before saying, "I heard footsteps in the corridor around 2 in the morning. I thought it was Carson, the butler, checking the doors." Carson, standing by the door, shook his head. "Not I, Miss Henshaw. I was in my quarters by midnight." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Footsteps in the night, he thought. A clue, or a distraction. Before he could press further, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the upper floor, sharp and piercing, like the cry of a wounded animal. The guests froze, their faces pale, and Poirot was already moving, his cane tapping briskly as he led the charge up the grand staircase. The scream had come from the east wing, where the guest rooms were located. Poirot followed the sound to a door at the end of the corridor, its handle cold to the touch. He pushed it open, revealing a chilling scene. Miss Beatrice Lyle, the Bohemian artist, lay crumpled on the floor of her room, her vibrant scarf tangled around her throat. Her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, and a faint blue tinge colored her lips. A shattered teacup lay beside her, its contents staining the carpet with a dark, bitter-smelling liquid. Dr. Felix Mortimer pushed past Poirot, kneeling beside the body. "Poison," he said grimly, sniffing the air. "Likely cyanide, given the speed and the smell. She sarp's been dead less than an hour." A collective gasp rose from the guests crowded in the doorway. Miss Duval clutched Sir Reginald Sep's arm, her face ashen. "Another murder?" she cried. "We sat her all doomed." "Non, non, mademoiselle," Poirot said sharply. "Panic? It serves only the killer. We must be methodical." He examined the room, noting the open window, its curtains fluttering in the morning breeze. A tray with a teapot and a single cup sat on the bedside table, untouched save for the spilled contents on the floor. "Who brought this tea to Mademoiselle Lyle?" he asked, his voice like steel. Carson stepped forward, his face impassive. "I delivered tea to all the guests this morning, sir, as instructed. Miss Lyle Sepps has left outside her door at 7. "And who prepared it?" Poirot pressed. "The kitchen maid, Mary," Carson replied. "But I poured it myself. It was just tea, nothing more." Poirot Sistin's gaze fell on the teacup, its rim stained with a faint residue. Vraiment, but something more was added. In Set's pas, he turned to the guests, his eyes piercing. "Did anyone see Mademoiselle Lyle this morning, or hear anything unusual?" Mrs. Langston Fester's voice was barely a whisper. I saw her at breakfast. She seemed distracted, kept talking about the clock, saying it was day watching us. Siston, I thought she was being fanciful." Poirot Sip's mind raced. 2 deaths, both tied to the clock, he thought. First a stabbing, now poison. The methods differ, but the intent is clear. He addressed Sir Reginald. "Monsieur, this room, it must be sealed, and no one is to touch the tea service. I shall examine it further." Sir Reginald nodded, his face haggard. "Monsieur Poirot, what is happening? Why us? Why now?" Poirot's sip's eyes gleamed. "That, Sir Reginald, is the question. But past, it casts a long shadow, and these deaths, they are its reckoning." He glanced at the clock in the hall, its hands pointing to 8. "The clock ticks on, and we must move swiftly, lest it strikes again." As the guests retreated, their whispers a chorus of fear. Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on Beatrice's scarf, its vibrant colors now a cruel irony. The second stroke, he thought, but not the last. The killer plays a dangerous game, and Hercule Poirot shall meet the challenge. Chapter 8. The Clockmaker Sept's Secret. The air in Blackthornne Manor had grown thick with dread, each creak of the floorboards and flicker of candlelight amplifying the guests' unease. 2 murders in less than 12 hours. Mr. Leonard Price, stabbed in the library, and Miss Beatrice Lyle, poisoned in her room, had turned the New Year's Eve celebration into a nightmare. Hercule Poirot, undaunted, stood in the entrance hall, his sharp eyes fixed on the grandfather clock that loomed like a sentinel. Its relentless tick-tock seemed to mock the chaos, and Poirot sensed it held a key to the mystery. "Mes amis," Poirot said, addressing the gathered guests, who huddled in the drawing-room doorway, their faces pale and drawn. "The clock, it is no mere ornament. It speaks to us, and Hercule Poirot, he listens." He gestured to the towering timepiece, its Roman numerals glinting in the dim light. "Sir Reginald, tell me of its history." Sir Reginald Blackthornne, his silvered hair dishevelled and his eyes haunted, stepped forward. "It was my grandmother's, Lady Augusta's, pride and joy," he said, his voice low. "She commissioned it from a Swiss clockmaker in 1870. She was obsessed with it. Said it kept the family's truth. I always thought it was just her eccentricity." "Eccentricity, monsieur?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Or perhaps something more?" He approached the clock, his cane tapping the floor. The oak casing was intricately carved with vines and roses, and its pendulum swung with hypnotic precision. Poirot ran his gloved fingers along the edges, searching for irregularities. "Vraiment, a clock such as this. It is a work of art. But art, it often conceals function." He pressed gently on a carved rose, and a faint click echoed in the hall. The guests gasped as a small panel at the clock's base slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed papers tied with a faded ribbon, and a small brass key, its surface etched with the Blackthornne crest. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, carefully retrieving the items. He untied the ribbon, revealing letters in a spidery script. The topmost sheet bore a single line. The 12th stroke seals the debt. The words sent a chill through the room, echoing the cryptic note found beside Price's body. Mrs. Ellis's body. Mrs. Eleanor Langston, clutching her shawl, whispered, "It sets her, Lady Augusta. She sets behind this, even from the grave." "Non, madame," Poirot said sharply. "The dead do not wield knives or poison cups. This is the work of a living hand, one that uses the past as a weapon." He turned to the guests, his eyes piercing. "These papers, they are a clue. But to what?" Miss Clara Henshaw, her notebook trembling in her hands, spoke up. "Lady Augusta was known in the village for her ruthlessness. She ruined families over debts, foreclosed on homes. My aunt used to say the Blackthornne set's wealth was built on others' set's misery." Sir Reginald Say's face darkened. "That sells slander, Miss Henshaw. My grandmother was a businesswoman. Nothing more." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral. He examined the brass key, its weight suggesting it unlocked something significant. "This key, it belongs to what? A safe? A door? Sir Reginald? You know this house best." Sir Reginald hesitated, his eyes flickering with unease. "Their Sept's a locked study in the west wing. It was my grandmother Sept's private room. No one Sept's been inside since her death, in 1895. The key might fit." Poirot's little grey cells hummed. "Then we shall investigate this study. But first, I must know more of Mademoiselle Lyle's death." He turned to Dr. Felix Mortimer, who stood rigidly, his cufflinks glinting nervously. "Doctor," you said, cyanide. "Is it possible the poison was in the teapot, not the cup?" Mortimer nodded. "Possible, but unlikely. The residue was concentrated in the cup, and the teapot smelled clean. Someone added the poison after the tea was poured." "Interessant," Poirot said. He glanced at Timothy Wren, whose nervous fidgeting had intensified. "Monsieur Wren, you were seen near the east wing this morning before the scream. What were you doing?" Timothy's face flushed. I was checking the guest list for Sir Reginald. I passed Miss Lyle's door, but I didn't go in. I swear it." His voice cracked, and Poirot noted the sweat beading on his brow. Miss Vivienne Duval, her black dress stark against her pale skin, scoffed. "Everyone sits. Lying on," said Vey. Price was a snake, and Beatrice, she was always sketching that clock, muttering about its secrets. Sit. Maybe she knew too much. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you, Mademoiselle Duval? Did you know too much of Mr. Price or Mademoiselle Lyle?" Her lips tightened. "I told you, Price tried to ruin me. As for Beatrice, she was odd, always watching, always drawing. She made me uneasy." Poirot filed each response away, his mind weaving a tapestry of motives and connections. "The clock, the key, the letters," he thought. "They point to a debt, but whose?" He addressed the group. "Return to your rooms, but stay in pairs. The killer is cunning, and we must not give them another chance to strike." As the guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy with fear, Poirot lingered by the clock, the brass key heavy in his hand. The pendulum swung, each tick a challenge. "Lady Augusta," he murmured, glancing at her portrait above the fireplace, "your legacy, it is a dangerous one, but Hercule Poirot, he shall uncover its truth." Chapter 9. A Web of Lies. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the leaded windows of Blackthornne Manor, casting a pall over the drawing-room where Hercule Poirot had gathered the remaining guests. The murders of Mr. Leonard Price and Miss Beatrice Lyle hung over them like a storm cloud, and the grandfather clock's relentless tick-tock in the hall seemed to count down to some unseen reckoning. Poirot, his neat figure poised by the fireplace, held the brass key from the clock's hidden compartment, its blackthorn crest glinting in his hand. His green eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the faces before him, each one a mask of fear, guilt, or defiance. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice clear and commanding, "the killer among us is clever, but not clever enough to escape Hercule Poirot. Lies, they are like threads in a tapestry. Pull one, and the whole unravels. Let us begin with your movements last night and this morning. Speak truthfully, or the little grey cells. They will find you out." Sir Reginald Blackthornne, his face haggard, spoke first. "After we retired last night, I went to my study to review some papers. I heard nothing until Miss Duval's scream at midnight. This morning, I was in the dining room until Beatrice was found." His voice was steady, but Poirot noted the way his fingers clutched the arm of his chair. "Vraiment," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "And these papers, they concerned Mr. Price." Sir Reginald hesitated. In part, he was handling a dispute over a family trust. "Nothing significant." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Nothing significant. Yet a man is dead," he thought. He turned to Miss Vivienne Duval, whose black dress clung to her like a second skin, her eyes wary. "Mademoiselle Duval, you were quick to scream when Mr. Price was found. Where were you before that moment?" "I was in the drawing-room, talking with Mr. Carver," she said, her French accent clipped. "We were discussing the theatre. I stepped into the hall to fetch my shawl when I heard a noise from the library. I looked in and saw him." Her voice faltered, but Poirot caught the flicker of calculation in her gaze. Mr. Carver, the jovial businessman, nodded vigorously. "That's right, Monsieur Poirot. Vivienne and I were chatting until just before midnight. I stayed in the drawing-room after she left." His smile was too wide, and Poirot noted the sweat on his brow despite the chill. "Curieux," Poirot murmured. He turned to Major Harold Grayson, whose weathered face was set in a scowl. "Major, you claimed to be in your room last night, yet Miss Henshaw heard footsteps in the corridor." "Were they yours?" Grayson's eyes flashed. "I told you I was asleep by 11. If there were footsteps, they weren't mine. Maybe it was that nervous boy, Wren, skulking about." His tone was belligerent, and Poirot marked the way his fist clenched. Timothy Wren, his spectacles slipping down his nose, stammered, I was in my room. I didn't leave until breakfast. I swear it." His voice rose, and Mrs. Eleanor Langston, seated beside him, flinched, her grey eyes filled with unease. "Madame Langston," Poirot said gently, "you were seen speaking with Mademoiselle Lyle at breakfast. Did she mention anything unusual?" Mrs. Langston's hands twisted her handkerchief. She was agitated. Kept saying the clock was watching her, that it knew something. "I thought she was overwrought. I went to my room after breakfast and stayed there until the scream." Her voice was barely a whisper, and Poirot noted the tremor in her hands. Miss Clara Henshaw, her notebook open, spoke up sharply. "I was in my room last night, writing. I heard those footsteps, as I said, but I didn't see anyone. This morning, I was in the library before Beatrice's death, looking for a book on local history." Her eyes darted to Sir Reginald, and Poirot sensed she was holding something back. Dr. Felix Mortimer, adjusting his cufflinks, offered, "I was in my room last night reviewing medical notes. This morning, I joined breakfast late and was in the conservatory until the scream. I saw no one near Beatrice's room." His voice was calm, but his restless fingers betrayed him. Poirot paced slowly, the brass key in his hand. "Mon Dieu, such a tangle of alibis, yet they do not align. Someone lies, and the lie, it points to murder." He held up the key. "This, found in the clock, unlocks Lady Augusta Scepter's study. We shall investigate it now. Sir Reginald, lead the way." The guests followed, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridors. The west wing was colder, its walls lined with faded tapestries. Sir Reginald stopped at a heavy oak door, its lock rusted but intact. Poirot inserted the key, and with a soft click, the door swung open, revealing a study frozen in time. Dust coated the desk, and shelves held ledgers and photographs, all bearing the Blackthornne crest. A single window shuttered tight, let in no light. Poirot Sips's eyes scanned the room, landing on a leather-bound ledger marked Debts and Obligations, 1890 to 1895. He opened it, revealing pages of names, sums, and cryptic notes. One entry caught his eye. "Price L. compromised, payment due by 12th stroke." A gasp came from Mrs. Langston. That's Sips his name. Leonard Price." "Oui," Poirot said, his voice low. "The past it speaks. But what debt did Mr. Price owe? And to whom?" He turned to the guests, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. "The clock, it counts the hours, and the killer, they count their victims. We must be swift, lest the next stroke claims another." As they returned to the drawing-room, the clock chimed 3. It sounded a warning. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with the weight of lies and secrets, each one a step closer to the truth or to another death. Chapter 10. The 11th Hour. The shadows lengthened in Blackthornne Manor as the day waned, the oppressive weight of 2 murders, Mr. Leonard Price and Miss Beatrice Lyle, bearing down on the remaining guests. The grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum swinging with relentless precision, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its tick-tock a countdown to an unknown fate. Hercule Poirot, his neat figure a beacon of resolve, stood in the drawing-room, the leather-bound ledger from Lady Augusta's study open before him. The cryptic entry about Price L. compromised, payment due by 12th stroke, burned in his mind, a clue tying the murders to the manor's dark past. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice steady but urgent, "the hour grows late, and the clock it warns us. 2 have fallen, and the number 12 it looms large. We must act swiftly to prevent another tragedy." His green eyes scanned the guests, their faces pale with fear. Sir Reginald Blackthornne, his hands trembling. Miss Vivienne Duval, her defiance crumbling. Mrs. Eleanor Langston, her eyes haunted, and Timothy Wren, his nervous fidgeting, now a constant. Major Harold Grayson, his weathered face set in a scowl, snapped, "What's this nonsense about 12? It's just a clock, Poirot. Find the killer, not fairy tales." His voice was rough, but Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, a sign of more than anger. "None, Major," Poirot replied, his tone sharp. "The clock. It is central. The note by Mr. Price, the words in this ledger, the death of Mademoiselle Lyle, all speak of the 12th stroke. It is a pattern, and Hercule Poirot, he sees patterns where others see chaos." Miss Clara Henshaw, clutching her notebook, spoke up, her voice trembling. "Lady Augusta's diaries mentioned a reckoning at 12. I read it in the village archives. She believed debts, financial or moral, must be paid when the clock struck 12. Her eyes darted to Sir Reginald, who flinched. "Raymond," Poirot said, his moustache twitching, "and these debts, they connect our victims. Mr. Price, a solicitor who meddled in secrets. Mademoiselle Lyle, an artist obsessed with this clock. But who else is marked?" He held up the brass key, its Blackthornne crest catching the firelight. "This key opened Lady Augusta's study, but there is more to unlock, n'est-ce pas?" Sir Reginald Sepp's voice was hoarse. "I don't set know what you mean, Poirot. My grandmother Sepp's debts died with her. This is madness." Poirot Sepp's gaze shifted to the clock, its hands creeping toward 11. "Madness, monsieur, or method? The killer uses the clock as a stage, each death a performance. We must find the next act before it begins." Dr. Felix Mortimer, his cufflinks glinting nervously, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, if the poison in Beatrice's tea was cyanide, it was likely taken from the Manor's old gardening shed. I noticed it yesterday. Chemicals, old bottles, left over from years past." His clinical tone belied the tension in his eyes. "Mercy, doctor," Poirot said. "This shed, it must be examined. But first," he turned to Timothy Wren, whose hands shook as he adjusted his spectacles. "Monsieur Wren, you were near Mademoiselle Lyle Sepp's room this morning. You claim innocence, yet your fear, it speaks. What do you know?" Timothy's face paled. "I told you I was just passing by. I didn't see anything. I cared for Beatrice, that's all. She was kind to me." His voice broke, and Mrs. Langston reached out, her hand hovering before retreating. Poirot Sepp's eyes narrowed. A connection, perhaps romantic, he thought. But is it motive? He addressed the group. "Tonight we stay together in this room. No one leaves until the clock strikes midnight. The killer, they will not strike under my watch." As the guests settled uneasily, the clock struck 11, its chimes reverberating like a death knell. The sound sent a shiver through the room, and Miss Duval clutched Sir Reginald Sepp's arm. "It's Sepp's coming," she whispered. "Another death." "None, mademoiselle," Poirot said firmly. "Not if Hercule Poirot can prevent it." He moved to the clock, examining its face closely. A faint scratch near the numeral 12 caught his eye, and he traced it with a gloved finger. "Curieux," he murmured. "A mark, deliberate, a signal, perhaps." Mrs. Langston Sepp's voice was barely audible. "Beatrice," said the clock, watched her. She drew it over and over. I saw her sketches. Always the clock, always 12. Poirot Sepp's mind raced. The number 12 was strokes, the debts. He turned to Carson, the butler, who stood silently by the door. "Carson, you served this house under Lady Augusta. Did she speak of a debt tied to the clock?" Carson's face remained impassive, but his eyes flickered. "She spoke of justice, sir," said the clock would mark, when old wrongs were righted. "I thought it was just her way." Poirot nodded, his little grey cells buzzing. Justice, debts, the 12th stroke. He glanced at the clock, its hands now minutes from midnight. "Mes amis, stay close. The hour approaches, and with it, the truth." A sudden flicker of the lights plunged the room into darkness, and a gasp rose from the guests. When the lights returned, a scream pierced the air, Mrs. Langston pointing at the floor. A single rose, its petals blood red, lay at the foot of the clock, a chilling echo of the carved roses on its casing. Poirot's heart quickened. Mon Dieu, the killer moves, but Hercule Poirot, he is ready. The clock's hands inched closer to 12, and the manor held its breath. Chapter 11. The Final Confrontation. The drawing-room of Blackthornne Manor was a cauldron of tension, the flickering firelight casting eerie shadows across the faces of the assembled guests. The grandfather clock in the hall stood silent, its hands frozen just past 11, as if time itself held its breath. Hercule Poirot, his small figure commanding the room, stood before the hearth, the leather-bound ledger and brass key from Lady Augusta's study in his hands. Leonard Price and Miss Beatrice Lyle study in his hands. Leonard Price and Miss Beatrice Lyle had woven a web of fear and deceit, and now, with the discovery of the blood-red rose at the clock's base, Poirot knew the moment of truth had arrived. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant. "The killer among us has played a game most intricate, using the clock and the number 12 as their stage. But Hercule Poirot, he sees through the shadows of lies. Tonight I reveal the murderer and their motive. For the little grey cells, they have unraveled the truth." The guests, seated in a tense semicircle, exchanged wary glances. Sir Reginald Blackthorne's face was ashen, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Miss Vivienne Duval's eyes darted nervously, her black dress stark against her pale skin. Mrs. Eleanor Langston clutched her shawl, her grey eyes wide with dread. Timothy Wren's spectacles glinted as he fidgeted, and Major Harold Grayson's scowl deepened. Miss Clara Henshaw clutched her notebook, her pen poised, while Dr. Felix Mortimer adjusted his cufflinks with a restless tick. Poirot held up the ledger. This book, hidden in Lady Augusta's study, speaks of debts, financial and moral, that have haunted this house for decades. Mr. Price, a solicitor, meddled in these debts, stirring old wounds. Mademoiselle Lyle, an artist, saw the clock's secrets in her sketches. Both were silenced. But why? The answer lies in the 12th stroke. He paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. The note by Mr. Price read, "The 12th stroke will end it." The ledger mentioned a debt due by the 12th stroke. Mademoiselle Lyle spoke of the clock watching her. And this rose, he gestured to the blood-red bloom now on the table. It echoes the carvings on the clock, a symbol of Lady Augusta's legacy. But it is not Lady Augusta who kills. It is one of you. A gasp rippled through the room. Major Grayson growled, "Get on with it, Poirot. Who sep's the murderer?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Patience, Major. Let us first consider the method." Mr. Price was stabbed in a locked library, the door open but the window sealed. Mademoiselle Lyle was poisoned with cyanide, her teacup tainted after it was poured. Two different methods, yet both precise, both tied to the clock's chimes. The killer, they are cunning, but they leave traces. He turned to Timothy Wren, whose face was pale as chalk. "Monsieur Wren, you were near the library before Mr. Price Sepp's death and near Mademoiselle Lyle Sepp's room before hers. You claim innocence, yet your fear betrays you." "Why?" Timothy's voice cracked. I loved Beatrice. I'd never hurt her. Price was a bully, but I didn't kill him. I was just afraid. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what." His hands shook, and Mrs. Langston reached out, her touch fleeting but tender. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Mrs. Langston. "Madame, your grief for your husband is real, yet you knew Mr. Price hounded you over debts. Did you seek revenge?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No, I hated him, but I could never. I'm not a killer." Her voice broke, and Poirot noted the sincerity in her trembling hands. He turned to Miss Henshaw, her notebook open. "Mademoiselle Henshaw, you have recorded everything, yet you conceal your own secrets. Your aunt spoke of Lady Augusta Sepp's ruthlessness. Did you seek to right old wrongs?" Miss Henshaw's face tightened. "I only wanted the truth about the Blackthornes. My family lost everything to them, but I didn't kill anyone." Her pen trembled, and Poirot marked the passion in her words. Finally he faced Sir Reginald. "Monsieur, this is your house, your legacy. The ledger shows debts tied to your family, and Mr. Price was meddling in them. Mademoiselle Lyle Sepp's sketches threatened to expose something. Did you silence them to protect the Blackthorne name?" Sir Reginald's face flushed. "That's absurd. I invited you here to prevent this madness, not to cause it." His voice rang with indignation, but Poirot saw the fear in his eyes. Poirot raised a hand. "Non, non. It is not Sir Reginald, nor is it Monsieur Wren, Madame Langston, or Mademoiselle Henshaw. The killer is one who moves unseen, who knows the manor's secrets and the clock's mechanisms." He paused, his gaze locking onto Dr. Felix Mortimer. "Dr. Mortimer, you have been most quiet. Your cufflinks, they betray your nerves. You spoke of cyanide in the gardening shed, yet how did you know its exact location? And why did your medical bag, inspected this morning, contain a vial of cyanide, carefully hidden?" Mortimer Stess's face strained of color. "That sip's preposterous. I Stess, my doctor. I use chemicals for treatment, not murder." Poirot's voice was steel. "Non, doctor. You are the grandson of a man ruined by Lady Augusta's debts, a man whose name appears in this ledger. You came to Blackthorne Manor not as a guest, but as an avenger. You stabbed Mr. Price, who uncovered your family's shame. You poisoned Mademoiselle Lyle, who saw your tampering with the clock in her sketches. The rose, it was your signature, a nod to the clock's carvings." Mortimer lunged to his feet, his cufflinks clattering to the floor. "You have no proof," he shouted, but his voice trembled. Poirot held up a small sketch, found in Beatrice Sipp's room. "This, drawn by Mademoiselle Lyle, shows you at the clock, adjusting its panel. And this," he produced a tiny vial from his pocket, retrieved from Mortimer Sipp's bag. "It matches the cyanide in the teacup. The game, it is over." Mortimer Sipp's shoulders sagged, and he collapsed into his chair, his face a mask of defeat. "They deserved it," he whispered. "Price was digging up my grandfather Sipp's ruin. Beatrice saw too much. The 12th stroke, it was to end the Blackthorne Sipp's curse." The guests gasped, and Sir Reginald staggered back. Poirot Sipp's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Justice, it is not yours to mete out, doctor. The law will judge you now." As Carson restrained Mortimer, the clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the manor. The sound was no longer menacing, but mournful, a requiem for the fallen. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, but the truth, it was a heavy burden. Chapter 12. The 12th Stroke. The drawing-room of Blackthorne Manor was silent, save for the faint crackle of the fire and the distant echo of the grandfather clock's midnight chimes, now fading into memory. Felix Mortimer sat slumped in his chair, his confession hanging heavy in the air, his cufflinks discarded on the floor like relics of his shattered facade. The guests, Sir Reginald Blackthorne, Miss Vivienne Duval, Mrs. Eleanor Langston, Timothy Wren, Major Harold Grayson, and Miss Clara Henshaw, stared at him, their faces a mix of shock, relief, and lingering fear. Hercule Poirot, his small figure radiating authority, held the leather-bound ledger and Beatrice Lyle's sketch, the final pieces of the puzzle that had unraveled a deadly scheme. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice steady but tinged with gravitas, "the killer has been revealed, but the truth, it is not yet complete. There is a final twist, a motive deeper than revenge that ties the murders of Mr. Leonard Price and Mademoiselle Beatrice Lyle to the heart of this manor. Allow Hercule Poirot to illuminate." He held up the ledger, its pages yellowed with age. "This book, hidden in Lady Augusta's study, records debts. Debts of money, yes, but also of honor. Dr. Mortimer spoke of his grandfather's ruin, a debt owed by the Blackthornes. But the little grey cells, they see beyond his words. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he turned to Mortimer. "Doctor, you claimed vengeance for your family, but this was not the whole truth, n'est-ce pas?" Mortimer Setter's head snapped up, his eyes wild. "What more do you want, Poirot? I confessed. It's over." "Non, non," Poirot said, his moustache twitching. It is not over until the final stroke is understood. You see, the ledger mentions not only your grandfather, but another name, Langston, the late husband of Madame Eleanor Langston. He turned to Mrs. Langston, whose face paled, her hands clutching her shawl. Madame Poirot continued gently, "Your husband Charles was ruined by a Blackthornne debt orchestrated by Lady Augusta. Mr. Price, as your solicitor, knew this and was blackmailing you, threatening to expose your family's shame. You confided in Dr. Mortimer, did you not? A shared grievance, a shared pain." Mrs. Langston's lips trembled. "I told him about Charles. Yes, but I didn't know he would kill. I only wanted peace." Her voice broke, and Timothy Wren beside her reached out, his hand steadying hers. Poirot nodded. "Well, but Dr. Mortimer saw an opportunity. He killed Mr. Price to silence his blackmail, using the library's letter opener to point to the Blackthornne legacy. Mademoiselle Lyle. She was a danger because her sketches revealed his tampering with the clock, a mechanism he used to stage the murders at the stroke of 12, a nod to Lady Augusta's obsession with time and justice. He held up Beatrice Sipter's sketch, showing Mortimer at the clock. "This drawing. It was her undoing. She saw you, Doctor, adjusting the hidden panel, perhaps planting the rose as a symbol of your vendetta. You poisoned her tea with cyanide from the gardening shed, ensuring her silence." Mortimer Spay's face twisted. She was too curious, always sketching, always watching. "I had to protect the plan." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "Your plan, it was not only revenge. The ledger reveals a final secret, a trust hidden by Lady Augusta worth a fortune to be claimed when her debts were paid at the 12th stroke. You believed that by eliminating those tied to the debts, Price, who knew of it, and Lyle, who suspected, you could claim the trust for yourself, posing as a descendant of a wronged family." A gasp rose from the guests. Sir Reginald staggered to his feet. "A trust? My grandmother never spoke of such a thing." "Mrs. Emmond," Poirot said. "She hid it, even from you, Sir Reginald. The clock-set's compartment, the key, the ledger, all were clues to its existence. Dr. Mortimer, a man of medicine but also of greed, sought to erase the past to secure his future." Mortimer laughed bitterly. "You set a clever, Poirot." "Yes. The trust was my prize. The Blackthornes owed my family, and I meant to take what was mine. But you ruined it all." Poirot shook his head. "None, Doctor. You ruined yourself. The law, it will now decide your fate." He turned to Carson, the butler, who stood ready. "Ensure Dr. Mortimer is secured until the authorities arrive." As Carson led Mortimer away, the room exhaled, the tension breaking like a snapped thread. Miss Duval's shoulders sagged, and Major Grayson muttered, "Damned fool." Miss Henshaw scribbled furiously, her notebook a record of the truth. Timothy Wren held Mrs. Langston's hand, his devotion clear, and Poirot smiled faintly, noting the spark of hope amidst the darkness. "Mes amis," Poirot said. "The 12th stroke has sounded, and the debt is paid, not in blood, but in justice. The past, it cannot be undone, but the future, it is yours to shape." The clock in the hall ticked on, its chimes no longer a threat, but a reminder of time's enduring march. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, and Blackthornne Manor at last could rest. Chapter 13. The Dawn of Clarity. The first light of January 1st, 1936, broke over Blackthornne Manor, its pale rays piercing the mist that clung to the Gothic towers. The manor, once a stage for murder and deceit, stood quiet now, its secrets laid bare by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. The guests, weary but relieved, gathered in the entrance hall as the local constabulary took Dr. Felix Mortimer into custody, his confession of greed and vengeance echoing in their minds. The grandfather clock, its ominous chimes silenced, stood as a mute witness to the night's horrors. Hercule Poirot, his Homburg hat adjusted with precision, stood by the front door, his travelling case at his feet. The butler, Carson, held the door open, his impassive face softened by a flicker of gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, The Blackthornne family owes you a debt we cannot repay. The Blackthornne family owes you a debt we cannot repay. Poirot's moustache twitched. Non, Monsieur Carson. The debt, it is paid in truth, Hercule Poirot. He seeks only justice, and that, it is done. His green eyes swept the hall, lingering on the portrait of Lady Augusta Blackthornne, her stern gaze no longer menacing, but merely a relic of a troubled past. Sir Reginald Blackthornne approached, his silver hair combed, but his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Monsieur Poirot, you saved this house from ruin. The trust, I'll ensure it's used to right my grandmother's wrongs, starting with those named in the ledger. His voice was resolute, and Poirot nodded, approving the man's newfound resolve. Mrs. Eleanor Langston, her lace shawl draped loosely now, stood beside Timothy Wren, whose nervous fidgeting had given way to a quiet strength. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "I was drowning in grief and fear, but now I can face the future." Timothy's hand brushed hers, a silent promise, and Poirot's eyes twinkled at the spark of hope between them. Miss Vivienne Duval, her theatrical flair subdued, offered a small smile. "You're a marvel, monsieur. I'll play a detective in my next role, inspired by you." Poirot bowed slightly, amused by her resilience. Major Harold Grayson, gruff but chastened, muttered, "Didn't think you'd pull it off, Poirot. Damned fine work." His nod was curt, but Poirot sensed respect beneath the bluster. Miss Clara Henshaw, her notebook tucked away, approached last. "I'll write about this, Monsieur Poirot, but not to sensationalize. The truth deserves better." Her pinched face softened, and Poirot saw in her a commitment to honesty. As the guests dispersed to prepare for their departure, Poirot stepped outside, the crisp air biting at his face. The black Daimler that had brought him to the Manor waited, its driver as taciturn as before. Poirot paused, his gaze returning to the clock through the open door. Its pendulum swung gently, no longer a harbinger of death, but a simple measure of time. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured to himself. The heart of man. It is a labyrinth. Greed, revenge, love. They drive us to madness, yet also to redemption. He thought of Dr. Mortimer, whose quest for a hidden fortune had led to murder, and of the ledger's debts now to be repaid in acts of justice rather than blood. The 12th stroke had ended not just the mystery, but the curse of Blackthornne Manor. He climbed into the car, his cane resting beside him. As the Manor receded into the mist, Poirot's 6 little grey cells, ever restless, turned to the next challenge. "The world, it is full of puzzles," he said softly, "and Hercule Poirot, he is ready for them all." The car rolled toward London, and Blackthornne Manor faded into memory, its clock ticking on, a silent guardian of a new dawn.